Lord, you have guided our footsteps here. Indeed, it was you that put the desire to come back a second day to this place. But, oh Lord, we want to acknowledge not only your goodness and your greatness. We want to acknowledge your sovereignty. We want to acknowledge that not only does God breathe and cause us to walk and to move and have our sense of being, but it is God that lays the burden upon our hearts to serve in the fields where others will not serve. Lord, each and every one of us here under the sound of my voice has been called by you to serve in the trenches and even in the palaces. Lord, I ask that you would allow and send your Holy Spirit, because you have agreed in the Godhead that the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, that whatever you decide is and will come to pass. So, Father, let the tongues of fire that come down from the Holy Spirit anoint us this morning. Move us, O God, to be the people that you want us to be as we seek those who do not know you. Lord, we are all part of one big puzzle in the family of God. And now, O Lord, we ask that you quicken our spirits, that you take these proceedings into your hands as you've always done. But we do this and we ask this knowing not only that you are God, but that you have our best interest at heart. So, Father, we thank you for each and every person who's here. Cause them to celebrate the life that you've given them by enabling others to find the life in Jesus the Christ. Thank you, Lord, we pray. In the name of Jesus. Amen.
You already recall that Dr. Laria is the pivot point upon which this conference is centered upon. It encircles it. When one have a dream and they keep it to themselves, it doesn't work. But Dr. Laria had that dream. And I'm sure she shared it with her husband first. You know, the pillow talk? And then we came after, a team of dynamic, powerful Caribbean Union College, University, beautiful people, victim and witness support officers, volunteers. They're all here today. And Dr. Laria is going to be the first person in our breakout session. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, could we put our hands together to a G-Score welcome to Dr. Yvonne Laria. All right, good morning again. Let me see. Okay, so I have 25 minutes, so I think I will reduce that to 20 minutes because we're running behind. So my research, the research that began this organization, is on the perceptions and attitudes of stakeholders toward school counseling in the Caribbean, in the English-speaking Caribbean. And in this session, in this plenary session, I'm just going to give you an overview of the study. In the workshop, we're going to talk more in more detail about what some of our findings were. We're going to talk about recommendations. We're going to talk about interventions on how we would move forward. So the purpose of the study, let me give you some background information. The reason I started this study was about 10 years ago. As an academic, I wanted to figure out a way. I wanted to know what was happening in the Caribbean regarding school counseling, because one of my areas of expertise is in school counseling, and I was, working on research and working to get tenure and promotion, and I felt like what's happening in my country, in my region, regarding school counseling? Because when I was here as a student in primary and secondary school, there were no counselors. And as a practitioner, I practiced as a school counselor for about 10 years, and I saw the benefits it had for our children in the U.S., and I was wondering, well, what's going on in the Caribbean? So I started doing some research, literature review, to see what's happening. Well, I found 2 articles that were not directly related to school counseling in the Caribbean. One was written by Shirley McGee from Bermuda, and another one was written by one of our presenters here, Dr. Shirlene Smith Augustine. Is she in here? She's from Belize originally, and so she did some work on that in Belize. And then there was the other study that was sort of related. What it was that this author, McGee's from Bahamas, she did a study on stakeholders in the schools, and one of the stakeholder groups that she used were counselors. So that's the connection. Outside of that, there were no studies where school counselors were the main group investigated. And so a major gap, right? Then I decided, well, something needs to be done. And I decided I'm going to do it. And so started talking with some people from the different ministries of education across the Caribbean to kind of get a sense of, is there a need? What's happening with school counseling? Eventually, I got a grant from my university, Indiana University, to travel to several countries in the Caribbean to do investigations on school counseling, what the perceptions and attitudes are of school counseling in the Caribbean region. So I traveled to 4 different Caribbean islands during that time, and talked with Ministry of Education Student Services department heads in Antigua, Barbados, Grenada, and in Trinidad. Found some very interesting information, and then after that point, we moved into more official work. And Dr. Donna Maynard from Barbados is one of the people that I met with during that trip. Well, why the Caribbean region? Because I am a Caribbean person, and there was a gap, clearly, and I felt the need to find a way to either reduce the gap or eliminate it completely. So who were the study participants? The study participants, like I said, were directors of ministries of education that deals specifically with student services, student service personnel. We also had included in our study were students, primary and secondary students. We also had the parents of the students. We had the teachers. We had principals, school counselors. So principals, school counselors, parents, teachers, and students. So we interviewed, we surveyed all 5 stakeholder groups based on the principle of based on the theory or the perspective, the ecological perspective of counseling, because that is our foundation. We believe that in order for any type of change, any type of effective change to take place, it has to be engaging all stakeholders. And so we wanted to get a comprehensive picture of what is happening, what are people's perceptions. And the people that we're talking about needs to be the people who are directly impacted by the phenomenon that we're studying. And so we included all 5 stakeholder groups in our study. Our research questions. What do stakeholders believe about school counseling programs in the Caribbean, in the English-speaking Caribbean? And at that time, we had 4 islands. We've extended that study now to 9 Caribbean islands, and we've also modified our survey questionnaire, our survey instrument. So our first stakeholder question, our first research question was, what do stakeholders believe about school counseling? Then our second question, what do they believe about the role and function of school counselors? Okay, so the first question is about the programming, and the second question is about the personnel, the role and function. What do school counselors do? What do people believe they do? How do people feel about what they do? The next question, what barriers exist in the design and implementation of Come on up, Dr. Hutchinson. What barriers exist in the design and implementation of comprehensive school counseling programs? Why, if there are no programs in the Caribbean, why? What's getting in the way of having school counseling programs? What's getting in the way of implementing them? Additionally, the last research question was, what facilitators are present that support the design and implementation of comprehensive school counseling programs? So what is already in existence that's working, that can support a comprehensive school counseling program? So those are the questions we asked all stakeholder groups. So we asked the directors of student services, we asked the students, we asked parents, teachers, administrators, and school counselors. The study design, we used the methodology. We used a mixed methods design. The reason being, when we're doing, especially when you're doing cross-cultural types of research, you want to ensure that you get a depth of information. And we structured our survey in such a way that there were 14 items on the quantitative side of, 14 items total for the student survey, the parent survey, and 21 items for the administrators, counselors, and parents. The reason we did it, and we had four qualitative questions, which were open-ended questions. What do you see as some of the facilitators? What do you see as some of the barriers to school counseling? And we did it in that way because we wanted to get a depth of knowledge. We wanted to get a depth of information regarding what these people really think. We didn't want to, put people into a box and just have them do a Likert scale, disagree, agree, strongly agree. We wanted to get some colorful information. And so hence the reason we did a mixed methodology. Our sample size, and in that study that I'm talking about, where we used those 4 countries, we mailed out over 7,000 surveys to the Caribbean. And we used a stratified sampling method. How we recruited, like I said, I came to the Caribbean, traveled to the different countries, made phone calls, got the buy-in of the student services departments, did a lot of talking and trying to help people understand the need for this study, the need for it. In addition, letting them see it wasn't just a project for me, but how it can benefit the region. Like I said, the instrument, one group of instruments was 14 items and another 21 items. And again, we've modified that survey as we've used it. The data analysis, we used several different analyses, frequency, distributions, etc. I won't go into all of those details right now because I don't think that's really interesting as much as this part. So the barriers. What are some of the barriers that we found? Some of the barriers. One of the main things we found across those countries, and I will incorporate some of the information that we found, some of the data that we've been finding recently with the additional countries that we've surveyed. Resources. Not having enough resources. Financial resources was one of the main factors that limited the design and implementation of comprehensive school counseling programs in the Caribbean, and that was across the islands. Another one of the barriers was human resources. The training, not having adequate training for school counseling. many of the school counselors across the islands, that I'm not going to identify which island reported what because of confidentiality and privacy, and I want people to continue this study. So if I put people on blast, then they wouldn't, and I wouldn't get cooperation. But across the islands, another barrier was many of the counselors have the degree, may have a degree, but not necessarily in counseling. And that was another barrier. Another barrier that we found is the lack of collaborative working with principals and counselors. Principals didn't see the need for counselors in the way that counseling should be executed or implemented. Another barrier is not understanding the role and function of school counseling. What is that? What is school counseling? What is the role? Needing to have a school counselor identity, that was an issue. Communication between parents and school and child and student was another barrier to the design and implementation of comprehensive school counseling. Did I say finances? That was a huge problem. Not getting the funding that was necessary to have school counselors in schools. Many schools, especially in the rural parts of these countries, wouldn't see a school counselor for months, and if at all. Then another issue was the level, in terms of many of the school counselors were at the secondary school level and not at the elementary school level. And one of my professional beliefs and personal beliefs is that it is much more productive and more effective to have early intervention than it is to wait till students have learned how to be a student in secondary school, than if they had learned how to be a successful student from elementary school. Because there is such thing as learning how to be a student. One of the reasons we find such a high dropout rate is because students do not know how to be students, how to be successful students. And school counselors are equipped. A well-trained school counselor can be a mitigating factor in terms of ensuring children continue throughout their elementary and secondary school training. So it is important that we have elementary school counselors or primary school counselors and not wait till they get to secondary school, where these students now have habits that are not conducive to success. Okay? And so it's critical that we invest in having elementary school counselors. So those are some of the barriers, and like I said, in our workshop we will talk some more about those. Facilitators, what are some of the things that were in place that could be and were being used to support designing and implementing an effective school counseling program? Some of the information that we found was the need. Students wanted the help. They wanted the support. And so we felt like the fact that you want the support helps with the outcome, because then you're going to be willing to get the help. That there were parents in the community, in different communities, that were willing to come to the school counselor. They were reaching out. So there was a mutual realization that we have this problem, you have this resource, we want to tap into that. So those were factors that helped facilitate and that can help facilitate building strong programs, school counseling programs. Another facilitator that we found was that some of the school counselors were forward-thinking. They were forward-thinking and wanted to push the agenda of social-emotional education, academic development, and career development of the students. Again, willingness to want to move things forward, willingness to conceptualize our children and youth as whole beings needing the support. And with that mindset, they were willing to look for resources, go above and beyond. And so those are some of the facilitators that helped and that can help to move the school counseling programs forward. Let's move on to the next slide. I guess that would be me, huh? So what? This is a so what, and we will talk some more about the so what in our workshops. What difference will this information make in the lives of the stakeholders? And that's where we're going to talk about recommendations and implications. Knowing this now, Maya Angelou says, when you know better, you do better, right? And the purpose of this study is to get a baseline of what is happening in our region so that we can advocate, we can collaborate, we can teach our students to relate so that they can navigate. Those are the things, that's the difference that this research is going to make and has been making. We have sent out reports to several of the countries that we've done research in, and they have started implementing some of our recommendations. And some of the representatives here today are here as a direct result of the research and recommendations that have been already started. So it is making a difference. And we want to make a greater difference and include as many islands and countries as possible so that the end user, which are our children and youth and communities, can see the difference. Because we have to be able to work together. School, family, and communities have to work together, have to be fully engaged in order for us to see differences in our students, in order for us to remove, reduce, and eliminate many of these barriers to student success. It is critical once our students have resolved some of their affective issues, then they can start focusing on academic issues. We find it very difficult for students to focus on academics when their social, emotional, affective lives are in chaos and disarray. So we will talk some more later on. I think my workshop is tomorrow. And so at that workshop, I will expand and we will share information on how we can move forward, what we're going to do with this information, what we're going to continue doing with this information. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Larry, and we'll invite Dr. Clark to join us at the table, and he will continue moderating.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for deputizing during my unexpected delay. I would like to present to you the next speaker. Professor Hutchison is no stranger to us in Trinidad and in the Caribbean. He has distinguished himself in his field, and he's a respectable practitioner in the field of psychiatry for over 20 years. He has published noteworthy work examining social non-medical beliefs and healing, as well as research on suicide. He believes that mental health problems no longer define the affected person, but instead defines all of us. So really all of us are in different states of mental health. You know, there's this continuum. So today you are in a pretty good state of health, and then you dislocate your knee and your shoulder, like I did, and then you're not in a good state of mental health. So you see, there's this fluid definition of mental health. He's a graduate of the St. Mary's College and University of the West Indies and the University of London, Institute of Psychiatry, and London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Currently, he's Professor of Psychiatry at the Faculty of Medical Sciences at UE, St. Augustine. He is also an honorary consultant and head of mental health services at the North Central Regional Health Authority. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Professor Gerard Hutchison.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Professor Clark. And firstly, of course, I'd like to thank the organizers for, one, inviting me, two, for, well, maybe that's the other way around. One, for organizing the conference, two, for inviting me. I think that as we'll perhaps come to see later on in the presentation, the adolescent age group especially is probably the one that's most denied in terms of the services that are available, certainly in terms of mental health. And I think that's a crucial gap in terms of the provision of overall services for the country, and certainly contributes to a lot of the problems we have, both in mental health and socially. So I'm going to give you an overview of mental health by necessity and experience. It's probably focused predominantly on Trinidad and Tobago. There will be, of course, references to other countries, but I think most of the problems that apply here apply across the region, as we'll see. And then we'll discuss the available responses and perhaps look into the future a little bit. So the first, so we have some technological right. The first order of business really is to determine what we mean by mental health. Usually when people talk about mental health, and certainly when they present mental health related issues at conferences, really they referring to mental illness more so than mental health. But of course it's important to understand what mental health is, and the definitions that apply are quite varied, but in essence they incorporate the concepts that I've listed there: sense of well-being, which in turn is related to life satisfaction, the capacity to respond to adversity appropriately and successfully, which is resilience, the ability to behave appropriately and contextually, and to be the capacity to respond to consensus and appreciate the decision-making process that goes towards defining social norms. One of the big challenges in the Caribbean is that we have very little population-wide data about mental health and also mental illness. So a lot of the information we have is related to very specific populations, and apart from that is kind of imported from the literature that has been published from other jurisdictions. WHO, though, did make an attempt in 2001 to give us a definition, and that definition refers to, interestingly, the capacity for someone to realize their abilities. And that, I think, is probably the key element or the key component of mental health, the capacity for somebody to optimize the skills, the talents that they've been given. And of course, the optimization of those skills and talents requires, one, the ability to overcome the challenges that would prevent you from doing so, but also, primarily, as Freud would have said, demands a self-analysis, ability to appreciate your strengths, your gifts, as well as your weaknesses, and then to plot a course in your life that allows for the optimization of those gifts and the overcoming, as far as is possible, of the weaknesses. And of course, in mental illness treatment, it is about, for the most part, helping people to manage those weaknesses, overcome them if possible. But I think the neglected part, and this goes back to what Professor Clark was saying in introducing me, is about that optimization, because I think that if you optimize your skills, that in itself allows you to overcome your weaknesses. And of course, school is where you develop some of the strategies for that optimization, but also where you learn how to relate to other people, how to work in groups, how to plan and generate what I call your developmental trajectory, which allows you to determine whether you're reaching the goals that you're capable of reaching. And of course, the last part of it, meaning a contribution to the community, is important. And that contribution, whether it's as part of a family, related to your career, related to the activities that you engage in, is the facility to then make your community a better place because of your presence. So that, I think those two things go hand in hand, the optimization of your skills on one hand, and on the other hand, enhancing your community, so your presence would have left a mark that would have allowed your community to move forward in one way or another. I think we have to hold on a little bit while we sort out the pointer. So that's a lesson for to warn you about dependence on technology. Right, so this represents the architecture, if you will, for understanding mental health. It's, as you see, called a functional model of mental health. But the important thing that I want to point out to you is in that architecture that there are really two interacting areas of your life. One is what you've inherited. If you look at predisposing factors, the top there it says genetics, and then below that the family experiences that you have. But the rest of it is really related to your social experience and the social environment that you experience over the course of your life. Right, so you have genetic factors, and then these factors here refer to family, but all of these factors below here, housing, work conditions, employment, all of those things relate to your social experience. And therefore, it tells you that your social experience is a big part in forging your mental health and your ability to withstand the adversities that life will provide. And your present social context interacts with the factors, the life events that you experience to contribute to your mental health. And these are all the outcomes. And of course, the outcomes here relate to that point about optimization, as well as about contributing to a community, a state of well-being, as well as a sense of satisfaction with the achievements that you have in your life. So again, take-home message there is that your social experience becomes critical. Now, in the initial stages of your life, you have no influence on that because you're born into families, and those families, you have no choice about the family that you're born into. But it does speak to the critical nature of those early childhood experiences. And of course, going back to the theme of the conference, also as you grow up, the critical significance of your school experiences and your ability to navigate through those experiences in order to develop your knowledge of yourself, as well as your ability to withstand mental illness. So, bearing in mind that overarching theme, it suggests that problems in society are therefore related to problems in mental health. And I just came back from a Caribbean Public Health Agency, also known as CARFA conference, and the theme of the conference was injuries and violence. And one of the starkest papers delivered at that conference suggested that in the Caribbean, they surveyed 13 Caribbean countries. Now, the Caribbean Public Health Agency, they collect data about illness and mortality from the Caribbean. The biggest or most significant cause of death in people less than 44 years old is injuries, accidents, and violence, as violence to self, violence to others. And that in itself makes it almost a public health crisis, because it means that the most productive part of a person's life is in that under 44 age group, in terms of all the things we just talked about, that ability to know yourself and identify your goals and start working towards achieving them. And in all of the Caribbean countries, injuries, accidents, and violence are the single largest cause of death in this population. And of course, you'd be aware of some of the homicide statistics, but Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Belize, and St. Kitts are among the top 15 countries in the world in terms of homicide rates. And St. Lucia, St. Vincent, and the Dominican Republic are in the top 25. So you're talking about 7 Caribbean countries in the top 25 countries in the world in terms of homicide rates. And as an interesting aside, Central America makes up another 6 or 7 countries. So Central America and the Caribbean, in fact, constitutes the region with the largest or the highest homicide rates in the world. So we have to ask ourselves why that is so, and that's one of the things that we hopefully will be able to come to terms with over time, because unless we deal with those problems, it means that the future of our societies is in danger if so many of our young people, and of course predominantly the people affected by these incidents are males. So it means that a significant number of males are dropping out of our population, and I mean there are all kinds of consequences to that. The other big issue at the other end of the spectrum is aging. We'll talk about that. Dementia, depression in the elderly has become a major both public and social health issue. I always tell people that a kind of massive underground business is homes for the elderly. It's burgeoning and exploding, and it's something that we tend not to take for granted, not to take seriously and take for granted. But the number of people who are living to ages over 80 is now, I would say, exponentially increasing. So it seems like once you get past that first 44 years, the likelihood is that you're going to live quite long. And again, there are lots of economic implications as well as health implications. And of course, over time, the social, dietary, and institutional changes and leading to issues related related to developmental disorders, personality disorders, depression, substance use. And of course, from a physical health point of view, we're seeing, again, the other big theme coming out of that Caribbean Public Health Conference was the issue of obesity. Obesity now being seen in children as little as 5-6 years, and the proportion of the Caribbean population that's thought to be obese now is approaching 35%. So again, that's in itself a major problem, but of course contributing to the non-communicable disease epidemic that we face. The importance of that for mental health is that all these conditions, diabetes, hypertension, of course the cancers, all have mental health implications, as we'll see. And in some instances, the body image issues that arise out of obesity also are creating mental health problems. Another big industry is cosmetic surgery and bariatric surgery. Increasingly, numbers of men and women are having gastric bypass surgery in order to lose weight. So I think, and there's some people who feel, one of whom is Dr. Sandra Reed, who some of you might know, that obesity is a kind of mental health problem in and of itself, suggesting a kind of food addiction. So, dealing with injuries and violence is a headline from the newspapers in 2013. And the point here is that this is a man who was killed, one of those statistics contributing to that 0 to 44 death rate. But his sister was saying that in addition to being a victim, he was a son, he was a brother to 8 siblings, a father of 3, grandfather to 7 children, and an uncle to 22 nieces and nephews. So it means that when one person dies, the ripple effect is quite profound, and it suggests that these, if you add those people, you have 22 and 7, that's 29, 32, you have 40 people who were affected by this murder, and of course affected by the nature of the murder, a man being decapitated, but also the loss of this person in their lives. So that ripple effect means that these 40 people are now affected permanently because of this loss, and they now are at higher risk of developing mental health problems based on this loss. So, and of course, in our current climate, there's always the concern that when somebody is murdered in that way, that you, as a family member related to that person, are also at risk of being murdered yourself. So it adds to a quite profound influence on how one would see oneself and then how one would go about the rest of one's life. And going back to what we were saying about optimizing your potential, it immediately compromises your ability to do that, because it means that, in essence, in addition to dealing with the loss, you also have to be looking over your shoulder and wondering about your own future. And of course, this would distract you from being able to optimize your goals. And when you think of the children and adolescents involved in this, you can see how negatively this could impact on their student careers and then their subsequent lives. And this is even before they develop any diagnosable mental health problems. So, what do people seek when they reach out to mental health services? And we did some focus groups with caregivers, and we kind of outlined what they want. Of course, relief of symptoms, relief of distress. They want a better quality of life. They want less stigma, and that stigma is both social, of course, and institutional. They want more social support. They want to live in an environment where there's decreased aggression and risk of violence, and they want an intervention that works. And I think those are the kinds of principles that service provision at all levels, whether it be counseling in schools to a clinic for people with mental illness, those are the things that we have to seek to provide. And looking at changes over time, compared admissions to St. Anne's over the last 20 years, well, this is 86 to 2005, and we see that there has been a decreased number of admissions. There are more diagnoses of bipolar disorder, depression and personality disorder. Of course, the increased outpatient numbers, And we think that there is more awareness of these mental health issues over time because of the issues related, of course, to information and education. There are more treatment options, training many more psychologists, many more counselors, many more social workers. And there's a decreased desire, partly because of stigma and the knowledge that people have, for people to want to be admitted to hospital. So there have been changes, but those issues related to bipolar disorder, personality disorder, and depression are all important, as we'll see in terms of surveying the changes in mental health that have occurred over time. And in 1999, we did a study looking at perceptions of mental illness, and the key thing here is that 33% of the people we surveyed, which was about 300 people, students, young adults, thought that mental illness was caused by supernatural causes. And in terms of stigma, they didn't want to have any teaching, any eating from the individual afflicted. They didn't want that person to marry into their family. And caused one researcher to call it benign stigma, in terms that they tolerate the person, but they don't really want them to be too close to them. And of course, this speaks to the issues related to the seeking of help. And this is just to give you a kind of overview before we get into the details. And somebody who's here, Anne-Marie Ramkisoon, in her thesis, looked at, in 2012, she used the same case vignette and looked at attitudes to mental illness among university students, and she found that while approximately 80% of them said that they would seek help from medicine or medical services, 48%, almost half, said they would seek help from religious and spiritual healers, and 50% said both at the same time. So again, underlining the idea that we still have this conceptualization of mental health problems as being caused by some kind of religious or spiritual malady. And again, another student, 56%, and these are people admitted involuntarily for the first time, thinking that the reason was supernatural, religious, some kind of demon possession. And only 16% thinking it was a kind of mental illness. So, when we now swing to what predisposes people, these factors have been identified in terms of delinquency, low academic achievement, a family history of criminality, a living environment which is urban and congested, and most importantly, the idea of low self-esteem, drug use. And again, these factors, the low self-esteem and drug use, correlated with low academic achievement. So if you combine those two things, you have people in schools who are not doing well academically, who live in families that are perhaps somewhat antisocial, engage in drug use, have low self-esteem, and these are the things that predispose to delinquency, which in turn predispose to mental health problems. So we're going to just take a chronological approach now, go through the whole illness spectrum from birth to old age, and look at particular problems like self-harm. So again, a study some of our students did looking at Mount Hope and San Fernando found that 6 weeks after delivery, 25% of women had postpartum depression. Of course, only one of those actually got help. And that, I include this to say that that is something that we've neglected, both in terms of the issue of depression, but more generally maternal health. It has been shown in multiple studies that maternal health is a critical part, a critical factor in terms of predicting the mental health and physical health of adults. And I think this is an area that needs to be addressed with some urgency, because if 1 in 4 women have depression, there are significant implications for their ability to parent their children effectively. And then another study showed that children who were referred to the courts, 26% of them had diagnosable ADHD, compared to 7% of children who had not been referred. So again, suggesting that ADHD is an important part of the journey to delinquency, and again, that need for self-analysis, and in this case, parental awareness of ADHD as a problem that can be treated and thus prevent people from ending up in that kind of environment. Then gang involvement, we talked about the whole crime issue and gang involvement associated with availability of guns, having parents who favor antisocial behavior, intention to use drugs, having antisocial peers, and having peers who use drugs. Here again, introducing the whole idea of peer pressure and drug use, and being a big part of the process of delinquency, which in turn is a risk factor for mental health problems. Another major problem in the young is substance use. It's been found that the first use of alcohol across the region is 10 years, first use of cannabis is 12 years, and of course, as we just said, gang membership is associated with substance use, and there's an equal risk for females and males. And these are some of the risk factors: parental issues, childhood sexual abuse, school dropouts, family fragmentation, and decreased community and social support. Then there's the issue of battered women into intimate partner violence, 46% population prevalence based on one study. Again, if you relate that to postpartum depression, you see again mothers under a lot of pressure and being unable to parent properly. And most of those women who experienced intimate partner violence were victims of childhood sexual abuse themselves. We're running out of time, so I have to go through the rest of the slides quickly. Suicide and self-harm, major problem. If you look at the WHO suicide rates now, Guyana has the highest suicide rate in the world. Suriname is the 5th highest suicide rate. Trinidad and Tobago has the 41st. These problems are particularly related to young adults, and particularly males more than females, a ratio of 2 to 1. This just goes through those figures. And we see here in our UE students deliberate self-harm. 31% of UE students had a history of self-harm. And these are examples of that. Cutting, which has become a major thing in our society. Again, alcohol use, high prevalence, 31% binge drinking, 13% using alcohol. And a lot of people with alcohol dependence also have depression. And alcohol use is not just related to mental health, but to physical health. This study in Tobago showed that high sessional alcohol intake was the major cause of premature mortality in Tobago. Homelessness, 89% had a major psychiatric disorder, 66% had received treatment, 51% had substance abuse, and 25% had experienced drug rehabilitation. So, again, the overarching thesis that social problems are directly tied up with mental health problems, and all of these social issues, of course, as you would know, are very prevalent issues today. So I think it's important that as we approach counseling and as we approach the treatment of young people especially, we identify the presence of these social issues in their life, as well as have a very low threshold for establishing the presence of mental health problems, so treatment can help them achieve their potential, and be able to overcome the many adversities that they face in their lives. Thank you.
Our next presenter is Dr. Carl Wilfred Hunt. And Dr. Wilfred Hunt is an associate professor in the Department of Graduate Psychology and Counseling, and the program coordinator for the Counseling Psychology PhD program. Dr. Wilfred Hunt was born and raised in London, England, where she attended the Stanborough Park SDA Secondary School before coming to the U.S. to attend university. She's married with 2 beautiful children, whom she describes as the raison d'etre for her existence, I presume. As a result, her hobbies are her children, who she and her husband endeavor to expose to their joint passions for traveling, books, etc. Dr. Hunt was a professor in Chicago for 8 years in a clinical psychology doctoral program before joining the faculty at Andrews University in 2008. Her professional work includes provision of clinical services, teaching, research, and presentations on the intersect of culture and psychology. And that's always a very interesting and dynamic junction. She believes that maintaining these multiple roles through demanding circumstances provides her with a variety of professional experiences within the field of psychiatry that inform her classroom teaching, academic advising, and clinical work. Dr. Carl Wilfred Hunt will present to us Diversity IQ, Preparing the Self to Work with Others. I give you Dr. Wilfred Hunt.
Good morning. We're having some technical difficulties, but we'll get going. Let me see if I can remember what I started off with. Okay, I was going to start off with acknowledgements and thank Dr. Laria for inviting me to this conference and also for being the motivator and energizer and the source of all the energy for the conference. I believe that when she discussed this with me years ago, because it was in the making for a few years, I never imagined this moment where all of these ideas and all of her passions would come together and we'd be here at a conference, an international conference focused on meeting kids' needs in school counseling, through school counseling. So I wanted to say to her that being here actually feels more than just being at a conference. I feel like I'm part of a movement, the GCSCORED movement, and that we're being energized to go forward with the mission of the movement. So I want to thank her for that. I am coming from Andrews University in Michigan, in the US, and Andrews University is a university. There we go. Thank you so much. Yeah, is a university that prides itself, and I think it's a good accomplishment, on being very diverse. Last year on campus, we had 109 countries represented in our student and faculty body. We are now the 6th most international diversity in the US. That is not Christian or, secular, it's across the country, 6th in the nation. And 2nd in the nation for national diversity, which would look at groups such as African Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Native Americans. So it's a very diverse cultural mixing environment. It is in this environment that Dr. Laria got one of her degrees. She is a graduate of Andrews University, and just to give you some context to see how things come about, I am now the chair of the Department of Psychology and Counseling that she graduated from. And so it's in that environment that she began to think about her global vision. It's an international setting and it makes you think globally. And she began to think about her global vision there. But we are very proud of her and see her as the result of good training and exposure at Andrews. Some more context, personal and professional. I think you can see the T-shirt ad that I have on there. I have a connection not only to Dr. Laria and her training and background, but I have a connection to Trinidad. My parents are both from Trinidad, Aruca, Trinidad, actually. They, like many others, grew up here and then went to England to pursue their studies. They got married there, had their children there, raised their family there, and so that was where I grew up. But I had that connection from my parents to Trinidad, so I know what, roti is, and pylori and dalpuri, as opposed to, the other forms, aloo pie. I could go on, but I am versed in the food and in that experience. Having had that experience, though, it was interesting because my parents, growing up in Trinidad, grew up as majority cultured people. Most of the people who they grew up around looked very much like them. Most of the people who were in government looked very much like them. So they had what's called a majority cultured experience. My sister and I, however, growing up in England, had what's called a minority cultured experience. And so most of the people in positions of leadership, etc., in England look a little different from us. And so I think that had a lot to do with my beginnings in this field, thinking about diversity, thinking about how people are impacted by their group memberships. All of that started very young for me because it was part of my reality. I got to see how my parents navigated between the British culture and the Trinidadian culture, and some of the challenges and difficulties that they had. And all of that came together for me professionally when I had to choose a major. I gravitated towards psychology just instantly. I fell in love with it as soon as I interfaced with it in college. And then when I had to start thinking about areas to specialize and to do research in, the area of diversity and culture came naturally to me. I am fascinated by cultures and how people work within them, what the resiliency characteristics those cultures give to people, etc. So that led me to my current work with students, and these are psychologists in training. It's a doctoral program, and we train people, and at the end of 5-6 years, they are fully qualified doctoral level psychologists. And I've worked with them for over 10 years, trying to help them navigate this idea of how do you work with people who are different from you. It's easier to work with people who are similar to you, but when people are different, what does that mean, and how does that impact your work? So much of what I'll be presenting today is really from that work with those students. I've found that there's some key things that are important, and it's not just for psychologists or psychologists in training. What we're finding out is that this would really be helpful to anyone who is working with or part of a family or is a human being, would benefit from developing these skills so they can better navigate the diverse settings that we find ourselves in. So the goals for today are to think about moving your school, your system, your organization, your setting from passive representational diversity to inclusive transformational diversity. And we're in an age where everyone's talking about diversity and everyone has trainings, and many of us are in systems that require us to go to a certain training each year at least. But something is still missing from that training because most of these systems are not where they need to be. We're also going to review cultural, organizational, and personal perspectives on fostering inclusion in human interactions under conditions of personal difference, things like race, ethnicity, culture, gender, religion, etc. So I'll start off with a story. I'd like to begin today with this story, and it reads, "The forest was my home. I lived there, and I cared about it. I tried to keep it neat and clean. Then one sunny day, while I was cleaning up some garbage a camper had left behind, I heard footsteps. I leapt behind a tree and saw a little girl coming down the trail carrying a basket. I was suspicious of this little girl right away because she was dressed funny, all in red, and her head covered up as if she didn't want people to know who she was. Naturally, I stopped to check her out. I asked who she was, where she was going, where she had come from, and all of that. She gave me some song and dance about going to her grandmother's house with a basket of lunch. She appeared to be a basically honest person, but she was in my forest, and she certainly looked suspicious with that strange get-up of hers. So I decided to teach her just how serious it is to prance through the forest, unannounced and dressed funny. I let her go on her way, but I ran ahead of her to her grandmother's house. When I saw that nice old woman, I explained my problem, and she agreed that her granddaughter needed to learn a lesson, all right. That old woman agreed to stay out of sight until I called her. Actually, she just hid under the bed. When the girl arrived, I invited her into the bedroom, where I was in bed, dressed like her grandmother. The girl came in all rosy-cheeked and said something nasty about my big ears. I've been insulted before, so I made the best of it by suggesting that my big ears would help me hear her better. Now, what I meant was that I liked her and wanted to pay close attention to what she was saying. But she made another insulting crack about my bulging eyes. Now, you can see how I was beginning to feel about this little girl who put on such a nice front, but was apparently a very nasty little person. Still, I made it a policy to turn the other cheek, so I told her that my big eyes helped me see her better. Her next insult really got to me, however. I've got this problem with, well, having big teeth. And that little girl made an insulting crack about it. I know I should have had better control, but I leapt out from the bed and growled that my teeth would help me eat her better. Now, let's face it, no wolf could ever eat a little girl. Everyone knows that. But that crazy girl started running around the house screaming. Me chasing her to calm her down. I'd even taken off the grandmother's clothes, but that only seemed to make it worse. All of a sudden, the door crashed open, and a big lumberjack is standing there with his axe. I looked at him, and all of a sudden, it came clear to me I was in trouble. There was an open window behind me, and I went out. I like to say that was the end of the story, but that grandmother character never did tell my side of the story. Before long, the word got around that I was a mean, nasty guy. Everyone started avoiding me. I don't know about that little girl with the funny red outfit, but I didn't live happily ever after. The importance of narrative. Our lives are narratives. We are born into a culture, and we are born into a cultural narrative. We live the script we are given. Most individuals never challenge the narrative. We just accept it. Certain groups are marginalized and oppressed, i.e., given narratives that are negative. Often our earliest memories are of fairy tales, stories that we have heard in our childhood: Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, Jack and the Beanstalk, Little Red Riding Hood. These are seen as just harmless children's stories, but they are potent cultural messengers, delivering the narratives of our lives. Cinderella tells us girls how we should be, and even boys how to be princes. Sleeping Beauty tells us who's beautiful and who's not. And Little Red Riding Hood tells us that wolves are evil. What happens to the poor wolf who is born into this narrative? He's always scripted into the bad guy role. Think about the other stories. Three Little Pigs. The wolf is bad. The wolf is always bad. It's no good wolf. So the narrative really, I like talking about the fairy tales because they're generally known. And it's interesting, it doesn't matter what group I speak with, even if they're in a culturally different group from the creators of the stories, people know it. So there's something to be said, good and bad, about colonialization and spreading your narratives into other cultures. This is important because it may be seen as just sharing children's stories, but really it's sharing a cultural narrative that then is imposed upon people groups in other cultures. And so it becomes part of their narrative and part of the way of boxing them in. One of the activities that I have my students do when we are talking about this is to look at the children's stories that are indigenous to the countries that we're working with. So in the Caribbean, it would be Anansi stories, or something from what's his name, Paul Keynes Douglas, etc. Because each culture has its own narrative. But for so many cultures, they have been forced into the narrative of colonial powers, to put it nicely. Diversity is our reality. It's not something that's an option anymore. It's not something that we can say, oh, it doesn't matter to us here in Trinidad. It's only for those people in America or in England. No, it's everywhere. We all are present. We all are immersed in diverse environments. School systems have been trying to address the increasing multiculturalism and diversity within its systems. Businesses are learning to value diversity. They've been late to the party because at first they thought, well, who cares? But when they realize that it has an impact on the bottom line, making money, most businesses are getting on board with trying to train people to work across cultures and train their employees to work with each other. And societies are grappling with cultural pluralism. We've seen many incidents within Trinidad, within the US, within Europe, that are very diversity issue based. Lots of the issues to do with terrorism and lots of the issues to do with violence, bullying in the schools. Many of these things are based on bias and diversity issues. So it's something we can't ignore. So this whole issue of diversity education and training then becomes central to our debate. It doesn't matter what we're doing, we're going to have to address this. As a result of the often complex challenges of diverse settings, schools, colleges, businesses, government services, religious organizations have sought out diversity training to enable their constituents to, 1, live and work together more peacefully, 2, increase productivity, whether it's in the schools or in a business, and 3, so far, the push has really been to create a more visually diverse constituency base. And while I think that's a great thing, I just don't think it should be the complete goal. It's nice to have a nice picture, a photo op, that has people who look all very different and to say, we're a culturally diverse school. But that is just the first step in reaching competence. So there's another step that we have to get to. Many of you belong to institutions and have been employed in settings where you've had diversity training? Can I see a show of hands? Anybody who's gone through any diversity training in the room? A few. Many of you haven't, really? Put up your hand if you've never been through a diversity training. Really? There are a few settings out there who haven't done it. Okay. Okay, well, but the many others have. And for the majority of those people, the diversity training will include a lot of knowledge-based information sharing. They focus on increasing knowledge base and knowing about differences that exist between groups. So it'll be like, okay, these are the foods that this group eats. This is the way this group dresses. These are the religious practices that this group, practices. These are the things that they do. This is a great place to start. Knowing something about others certainly raises our awareness, and it's definitely a good place to start. However, to move individuals from diversity awareness to cultural competence requires a little bit more. True cultural competence requires insight into self. And now this is what I'm bringing from the years of training with the psychologists in training, that they could know everything about every culture, and then they'd sit down in a room with a client and be totally blinded by their own bias and how that's impacting the client in front of them. And so we realized, wait a minute, we have got to do something here, because just giving them knowledge about these groups is clearly not enough. So we stepped it up and started doing this insight-oriented self-exploration training in preparing the self to work with others, whoever the different other is. And the results have been amazing. We have taken people who have been totally closed off from very homogeneous environments, lots of biases in place and entrenched, and feeling quite happy about their situation, like not wanting to move. And then they've gone through this insight-oriented approach, and they've come out the other side. One such student of mine, he is Caucasian, male, brought up in the Midwest in America, which is kind of like the middle of the country, Michigan kind of area. And he was a character. It was hard for him to begin to think about things from others' perspectives, and then think about what parts of him influenced his interactions with the other people. It's very easy to focus on the other, but when you have to focus on self, then now I'm getting into territory, and people are like, okay, I'm not so sure about that. But he entered into it, he participated, and at the end, he said, you have changed me irreparably. And I don't think he was smiling at the time, however. But anyway, he said, I've changed him irreparably. And then later on, he came back and he said, I cannot watch a movie anymore, any movie. The things that we explored, the things I found out about myself, the biases that exist, all of this stuff is now present for me, and I'm seeing things in a different way. Even just, going out for fun and seeing a movie is impacted by this kind of training. So this insight-oriented review of self in preparation to work with others is central to developing cultural competence. Understanding one's own worldview, assumptions, and behaviors. Got to work it out. If you don't know what's going on with you, how can you possibly help and help a child, help anybody else with what's going on with them? Understanding your experience of privilege, power, and oppression. We all have multiple group memberships, where we've got a gender, so I'm a woman, but I'm also a mother. Well, I'm also a person of color, but I'm also a person who is from England. All of these group memberships provide different lenses for us to see the world. And if we don't even know what lens we're looking through, how can we know what we're looking at? It's obscured by this. And so understanding our own experience of power, privilege, and oppression is important, and becoming aware of how our group memberships have scripted our narratives and our narratives' experience of others. Because who we are does impact how we see other people. That's the foundation of that. So there's a challenge today. It's difficult to lead someone to a place you've never visited. Have you thought about that? You're working with these kids, you're doing the stuff that you do in your different settings, and you say, yeah, I'm going to make this place culturally competent. But if you haven't done it for yourself, it's going to be very difficult to actually lead people in the process. So we've got to take up the challenge. One of the foundational goals of GCSCORED is to meet the social and emotional needs of children. Well, that's really difficult if you don't know your own social and emotional needs, and you don't manage your own social and emotional needs. You're in a culture that tells you that we don't really talk about feelings. We just laugh it off and pretend it doesn't exist and move on forward. Well, you know, if that's what you believe and that's what you're working on, then how are you going to be able to get kids to talk about their feelings and, you know, manage their emotions? You can't. This is the saying that I like. Children are smart. They hear what we feel, not what we say. Children are smart. They hear what we feel, not what we say. They look straight through that smile. They understand the biases that we have and the aspirations or lack thereof that we have for them when we're working with them. We've got to pay attention to those kinds of things and challenge ourselves to grow in this area. And acknowledging our own psychological challenges and demonstrating appropriate emotional regulation is essential to attaining this goal of meeting emotional needs of children. So preparing the self to work with the different other requires us being aware of the narratives and scripts that inform our life, challenging self to rewrite the narratives when necessary, and enabling others to write narratives that are empowering and affirming. And this will get us to the question that started off with the story. So how do we help those who have been given wolf narratives? In the schools and in education, we will work with many students who have been given negative narratives. The key to working effectively with the different other is insight into self. Only then can you help others rewrite their negative narratives into positive, empowering narratives. And I've been given 2 papers already, so before I get a third one, I will leave you with this quote. The key to working with diverse populations. Knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom. Mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is true power. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you in the workshop where we will do some actual self-work to develop this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Carl Wilfred Hunt. We're trying to manage our time and give as much time to the groups as possible. Our next presenter is Dr. Professor Susan Chan, a colleague of mine. She was the chair of social work until quite recently. She's now the Director of Research and Innovation. And Dr. Chan is currently the Professor of Anthropology at the School of Social Science, but as I said, she's now at Director of So she's been working at USC since 2005. And over the past 20 years, Professor Chan served as research officer and consultant in various research projects, resource person in training programs, and thesis supervisor for graduate and doctoral theses. She has been an editor-in-chief for the USC Journal of Research since 2008 until presently. And Dr. Chan has attended numerous conferences and presented papers at several conferences. Today, she is going to make a presentation to us on the topic, Emerging Patterns of Juvenile Delinquency in Trinidad and Tobago, Implications for Community-Based Interventions. Give a round of applause to Professor Susan Chan.
Thank you, Dr. Clark. Good morning to each and every one of you. It's so nice to be here, and I thank Dr. Laria for giving me the opportunity to be one of the presenters at this plenary session. And as previous speakers have spoken about her, she's an energetic person, a motivator, and she got me on the boat. I just had a little conversation with her about what I was doing, and said, come, let's do this presentation for this conference, and here am I. Well, thank you, and this morning, my presentation, as was said earlier, emerging patterns, but I'm rather going to focus on patterns of juvenile delinquency and what implications these have for community-based interventions. This has been my interest since I have been teaching this course since 2006 at the University of Southern Caribbean. And credit goes to my students for helping me collect case studies for this research. And I see a couple of them here seated right here this morning. I wasn't expecting them, but thank you for your contributions. Credit goes to you who are here this morning. I see a couple of you are here. It's social work students and those who are in the behavioral sciences and psychology. So this is a collection of case studies that we had done from 2006 until present. We have attempted to quantify the demographic variables to give you an idea about what are the demographics of these individuals who had whose cases were being studied and who had problems with delinquency. Okay. Sorry. Point where? Okay, this one. Thanks. All right, so this morning we have limited time, so we're going to look at some of the, just give you a little introduction, defining some of the terms, give you a little review of what studies have been done and demographics, connecting demographic variables to why children commit delinquent behaviors. And then the methodology of a study patterns of juvenile delinquency that was seen through these cases, and then what implications. The implication part will be more a workshop one, where we'll be looking at different strategies that could be used in the prevention of crimes and delinquent behavior. We see that it's becoming a growing issue in our community across the globe, and Trinidad and Tobago is not far away from it. And more young people are being involved in delinquent behaviors under the age of 18. This is a stage in life's course where young people should be involved in studies, in other activities that are, coinciding with their life course. But we find that it's not happening so. More and more are being involved in violent and antisocial behavior relatively early age than previously reported. And we saw from Dr. Hutchinson's presentation too that age at which children are engaging in drinking alcohol, smoking, and antisocial behaviors. So this presentation will be in line with a conference theme that every piece matters. There are children and adolescents in our communities who, on account of their delinquent behaviors, are being marginalized and find their spaces at the periphery of the communities without any social or emotional or financial moral support being extended to them. How do we then integrate global perspectives within the local context of Trinidad and Tobago to address problem of juvenile delinquency in our country? That's a question I would like you to think about when we will be having our workshop session this afternoon, rather this morning. So just defining a couple of terms, what does juvenile mean? It's interesting to see that different countries in the Caribbean refer to a person being a juvenile differently. Basically, it's a person under the legal age of adulthood. In Trinidad and Tobago, all children under the age of 18 are considered to be juvenile. And who is a juvenile? It's a child or young person who, under the respective legal system, may be dealt with for an offense in a manner which is different from adult. So a person committing any offenses, these are called status offenses, can be dealt with in a manner that's different than adult. And so we find that different countries have different ages for whom they consider to be juvenile. There's still an ongoing debate as to whether these ages are really, really applicable, or should it be considered, or should there be increase or decrease in ages. There's still some countries have submitted the bills to the parliament that needs to be passed. And so we find in Jamaica it's 17 years and under, considered to be a juvenile. Dominica, St. Kitts and Suriname, 16 years. Guyana, we have 17 years. Then what about delinquency? How do we define delinquency? It's any act that are criminal or are considered antisocial, which are committed by young people. So these are under the age of 18. Any act that are considered to be antisocial is delinquent behavior. And then these delinquent behaviors are, most of the time, they're also called as status offenses, which are acts which are deemed offenses when committed by juveniles, but are not considered when perpetrated by adults. So when it's under a statutory age, like drinking, underage drinking, is a delinquent behavior. So those are some of the definitions I want you to keep in mind as we move ahead with our discussion for this morning. Then this is not really directly connected with us, but it's mostly to do with the juvenile justice system. They also talk about age of criminal responsibility. At what age a child is responsible for the criminal act? A lot of debate again is going on. And we have the Convention for Rights of Children, Children's Authority Act. That bill is yet to be passed in the Parliament. That will address a lot of issues concerning our young people, our children in this country. And that not being enforced, we find children still being subjected to a lot of abuse and a lot of other being victims. And when they are victims, they are also perpetrators, as rightly pointed out by one of our speakers. Okay? So this is a prerequisite for a child being subjected to penal provisions of juvenile justice system. And again, different countries have different age groups for who can be tried in the penal court under up till what age, or being put into a juvenile facility homes. So for Trinidad and Tobago and Grenada, it's 7 years is the age of criminal responsibility. Turks and the other sets of other countries are 8 years. Belize have 9 years. And then we have Guyana, Montserrat, Suriname, and Virgin Islands, 10 years. Barbados have 11 years, Dominica and Jamaica, 11 years, and 12 years for Dominica and Jamaica. So these, again, ages have been, put in by CRC. Each country has their own body of Child Authority Act, and they determine who can be at a legal age to be tried and at what age they should be put into a facility. There are a lot of literature has been established on what are the contributing factors for delinquent behavior, And a lot of literature talk about socioeconomic variables like family, age, gender, parenting styles, income group, social class, ethnicity. And so there are a lot of literature that talks about it. Within the Caribbean also studies have been done, but not to a great extent. And there are studies in Jamaica, studies in Trinidad and Tobago. The ones done in Trinidad and Tobago have been done by the leading criminologist, Professor Dev Sharan and his colleagues. And USC also had launched a youth trend study under the principal investigator, Dr. Leon Wilson, who's here with us this morning, and we have Dr. Susan Wolford. They were also the principal investigator in the youth trend study 2009. That covered about 45 secondary schools in Trinidad and Tobago, studying about 8 to 9 to 10 different parameters of youth behavior across the campuses. So the results have not yet been published, but I know when they'll be making the presentations, they will be referring to that. Okay, we'll skip all of that. And like I said, methodology was basically case studies that were collected through the assignments given to the students. We had a format with the items listed down based on what they need to collect. We had the demographic information, and we had the information on the case regarding their historical development. What was the origin of delinquency? How did it origin? And how did it progress over the years? What was the coping mechanism? And what is the present status? So those were some of the things we were looking at in these case study. And I really liked what Dr. Hunt presented, the narratives. Well, each one of them was a narrative. And it was over 200 case studies were collected over these years. But we selected about 108 for our analysis. And reading those cases, some of them, it brought tears to my eyes. They were so touching. The things young people had to go on account of what was happening in their own family and in their own environment. So just the time is out for me, but there are certain things that we'll be discussing in our workshop, but I would like to just share with you some of the findings that we found by when we were quantifying the demographic information, because we had over 108 case studies that we collected, and each one of them was a narrative in its own, a story in its own. So we see this was the demographics that we find that there were male, female. We had about total of 79 were males, and females, 29 of them were there. And the age at which, so the ages covered was from 8 to 47. These cases were ranging. And the age at first delinquency started. It started with a fight. Some of them started fighting, stealing, smoking, engaging in sexual behavior. So some of those age at first delinquency started as early as from 5 to 25 years. But the peak is, the two peaks that you see is at the age of 12 and 14. Okay, so it's in line with what Dr. Hutchinson was also sharing with us. And then interesting finding was about the birth order. Most of the cases that we found in the study were first birth order compared to the other birth orders. And there are reasons for that. Because of what happens in the family, they have been given more responsibility to shoulder. They become the parent of the family, and then because of the stress they have to carry out within the family setup, they tend to be more delinquent. That's the coping mechanism. All right, so these are the birth order, male, female. And okay, I see Dr. Clark is already standing up, so but these are very interesting findings, giving you the different patterns of behavior. Most of them, what we found was, among the girls, running away was the biggest problem. Okay, and running away from school, running away from home, both between males and females, staying away late at night was still a problem. So as we find, and smoking, drinking was also a problem. but we were having a training program in a community that we were giving as part of national security program. USC is also engaged in training for crime prevention. So in this particular community, we were asking about what are some of the strategies that help in crime prevention. And they said was giving friendly spaces for young people within the community. We don't have friendly spaces created within the community where they could, relieve themselves. Why do they run away? They are running away from home because of what's happening in the home. When they go out in the community label them, discriminate them, and they run further away. And when they're running further away, their lives go down the hill. They start abusing drugs, alcohol, sexual activity. A lot of young girls were sexually active since as early as 10 years. So that's what we find here in this case study. So thank you very much. Please come for the workshop. We can discuss more.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry to waylay my colleague like that, but I've been getting red cards. And when you get a red card, you get put out the team. So I don't want to be put out the team. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been a very interesting session. We are really out of time. We should have been having our break now. As a matter of fact, we should be starting the workshop session. Consequently, you will have 10 minutes to leave, collect your food or refreshments, swallow, and go to your respective breakout sessions. I thank you so much for coming. I'm sorry that we had to cut short the presentations, but you'll make up that time in the breakout sessions. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.